So today, actually, I'll talk a bit about Aadhaar, but I want to go beyond Aadhaar because, you know, we are all accidental development junkies. Most of us are corporate types who spent many years in business. And when I got invited to start the Aadhaar project, it was the first time I was doing full time development, and we sort of got into it. And now there's a whole bunch of us who have sort of refugees from the corporate and technology world, who are looking at how to bring that knowledge into the development area. So that's the background of some of us. So I'll talk about beyond Aadhaar, but I'll just give you first. I think Aadhaar, as you know, is a well-known case study. It's a platform which was set up by the Indian government. It's important to realize that it was not thought of as a specific point solution for an issue, but as a platform of identity that could be used for multiple uses. I think that's the fundamental difference, because historically, when governments took up ID projects, they would do it for a purpose, say making elections more, you know making sure the voter lists are correct, or making sure benefits go to the right people. Or some countries would look at it from a security perspective to separate out citizens from migrants. So all ID projects historically have been need based, and the ID and the purpose have got commingled in what they do, which creates a monolithic solution. But one of the, I think, great achievements of the Indian government was to recognize that ID itself should be a separate thing. And that's what we call as foundational IDs. And I think now people around the world, and yesterday we had a very good discussion at the bank, chaired by Kristalina, which was about how foundational ID is essential for global development. So I think this is a realization now across the world that we have to separate the ID from its various uses. And that's Indian government took up this project in 2006, and in 2009 they took a decision to set up this body called Unique Identification Authority of India. And I was invited in June of 2009 to head this body, so I gave up my job at Infosys to do that. And so we designed it from day one as a platform. And I think that's very important to realize that our view was that one of the I think the two big innovations in the last few years has been the internet, and the second has been GPS, or global positioning systems. And both have some very common characteristics. Both were entirely funded R&D, and the funding of the infrastructure was done by the US government. The internet began with TCP/IP protocol 40 years back. And till about the mid 90s, the internet was essentially only used in the government academic circles. The next big leap happened when Tim Berners-Lee, who's now at MIT, came up with the World Wide Web in early 90s at CERN. And he made that a public good. He didn't, I think the greatness is that he made it a public good and gave it away. And the World Wide Web started the whole idea of the web. And the next big jump happened in 93, 94, when Mark Andreessen and others, again funded by an NSF grant. So you should realize all of this is US government funding, developed the first browser, Mosaic, in 1994. And then Mr. Andreessen went and he met a guy called James Clark in the Silicon Valley, and they set up the first private company that would use the internet called Netscape. So if you think of internet, the first 15, 17 years was entirely in government and academic and security circles. It's only in 95, with the launch of Netscape, that we saw the arrival of the private sector innovation on the internet. And then, of course, you know what happened, internet. So Bill Gates and Microsoft responded with Explorer, and the whole thing started. And then you had Google and Facebook and all that. So today we are seeing that the internet-enabled economy is a multi-trillion-dollar economy, but fundamentally supported by a platform created by public expenditure. The same thing happened with GPS. GPS was designed by the US government. If you remember, Star Wars, Reagan, missiles, all that good stuff. And they came up with this system of satellites that would triangulate every point on Earth, so that you could have the latitude, longitude of every point on Earth. And for a long time, it was used for military applications. And then some applications started when there was that plane that was shot down over Korea in the 90s. And then they said they should use this technology for that. And finally, in the era of the last few months of the Clinton administration, when President Bill Clinton in May of 2000 took a decision to put the GPS technology in the commercial domain, and said that commercial use of GPS would get the same level of accuracy on the location. Till then, they got lesser accuracy than military applications. They said the commercial user would get the same lat-long accuracy as the government would. So this was done as late as May of 2000. And I don't think anybody anticipated what would happen after that, because once you had that platform, within 5 to 6 years, you had Google Maps, which was the first large-scale use of maps using GPS technology. And then it went on, and now you have Uber and Lyft and all these things. So what it shows us is that when governments invest and build platforms, often they cannot anticipate how they will. I don't think if we had met in 2002, we would have thought about these things, right? There'll be a map and there'll be Uber and all this stuff. We could not have even visualized it. But because you had built these platforms, you now have the ability to do great things. So in some sense, when we did the Aadhaar project, we were inspired by the notion of the internet and GPS and said, can we think of identity as a platform? That is there a way to think of identity as a platform, which, unlike GPS, answers the question, where am I? We answer the question, who am I? That was the basic philosophy. And so we built it as a platform. We made it very lean and minimalistic. And some of our learnings on societal platforms came from that experience. And today it is, it's a large platform, 1.18 billion people on the platform. It has been used to rapidly open bank accounts. Today, a lot of the bank accounts opened in the Indian banking system use the Aadhaar KYC. The system does, as of last week, it did about 60 million authentications in a single day. So it does about 1 billion authentications a month. It's the world's largest cash transfer program with 500 million Aadhaar-linked bank accounts, which has totally transferred about $12 billion. It has been a huge source of savings for the Indian government. They have said they have saved $9 billion in reducing fraud and wastage in government programs, and on and on and on. So I think it shows that if you architect platforms properly, if you layer them properly, if you sort of put in different capabilities, then you can rapidly get an explosive growth of this thing. And that was a big learning for us from Aadhaar. But what happened was after I quit the government in March of 2014. After when I joined, I had made a public commitment that I would stay till we reach 600 million people. So that happened by March of 2014. So I said, okay, mission accomplished. I can go now. I quit and took the decision to stand for election, which I lost. And then I was unemployed because I had neither a job in the government, nor at Infosys, nor in politics. So at that time, my wife and I were at Harvard Cambridge, and we went to see the edX, which is the MOOC, which is jointly been set up by Harvard and MIT, and good friends of ours are running that place. And my wife had been working in primary education for more than a decade at that point, and working with Pratham and many groups. And she said, why don't you do a platform for kids, just like a MOOC is for people who want to do master's degree, but why not kids? So at that time, as I said, I was unemployed. So I said, what's the size of the problem? She said, 200 million kids. And what had happened was that because of Aadhaar, I had become sort of a junkie for solving large problems. So I'm not very good at solving small problems, but I try to solve large problems. So when she said, here's a chance to have an impact on the future lives of 200 million kids by using technology, I said, this is a good one. I mean, this is worth spending time on. And that's how we got into EkStep. And my colleague Shankar Marwada, who was at that time, had worked on Aadhaar with me. He had done the whole marketing demand generation side. He said he also came along. And so Shankar, Rohini, and I co-founded EkStep in June of 2014. So when we thought about this, we've been working on this now for 3 years. And I think where EkStep took us in a different direction was when we did Aadhaar. It was essentially a government project. I was a government employee. I had the rank of a cabinet minister in the government of India. So I had the state. I was part of the state. So it was really, while I had to do a lot of work on persuading people and all that, the state was behind it. But here we were like an NGO. We were outside the system. And we were trying to solve this goal of 200 million kids. So we had to think very differently. And we looked at metaphors, and we looked at the metaphor of how nature, for example, in the Cambrian radiation, suddenly there was a huge explosion of species and so on. And people believe that it happened because three things happened at the same time. You had oxygen abundance from 4% to 15% atmosphere that allowed new kinds of aerobic creatures to be created. The atmosphere became more predictable because the ozone layer had formed, so temperatures were not as varying as much, and habitat diversity had come. You had marshes, sea, water, mountains. All those came together and created this explosion of ecological innovation. So we said that, is there a way to induce that in a system? That is there, instead of we can wait for nature, but that took 10 million years, but we were in a bit of a hurry. So we said, is there a way to induce this? And so we said that, is there a way to think about taking low equilibrium situations and sort of inducing them to a different equilibrium? And that's what came up with the notion of what we call as societal platform thinking. And societal platform thinking is our way of inducing a new equilibrium. And we said, and this again, when we said this, see, our model is what we call as think, do, think. So, because we don't want to just think and we don't want to just do, so we do both. So we go and try to solve a problem. We learn from that. Then we abstract theory from that. Then we apply that theory, and we get so in this continuous improvement cycle of think, do, think. So a lot of this thinking came out of the EkStep experience. And so we said, is there a way to abstract this? And that's when Sanjay Purohit came along. A lot of our things happened by serendipity. So Sanjay had worked with me for many years at Infosys, and he had been head of consulting, and then he had quit, and he was saying, what do I do next? I said, come on, let's solve some big problems. So he came over. And he's been working on defining this infrastructure called societal platforms. And we said, and what does that mean? So we felt that this is, first of all, if you go back to the oxygen thing, it's about abundance, that a lot of problems are because scarce resources get blocked. And scarce resources could be expertise, content, assessment capability, whatever. The good thing about digital technology is that it can make scarce resources abundant. In other words, if you have a very sophisticated content for teaching integer place value in mathematics, or if you want to create a top class lesson plan, it's very difficult in the paper world. But if you can take the knowledge of creating a lesson plan and embed it in a digital platform, then every user of that platform has access to that. And you can keep doing that for different types of things. So you can take a content that was maybe developed in a village for 100 kids, make it digital, and suddenly 1 million kids have access. So the ability to have digital platforms to take something to scale is something that we believe can be used to make scarce resources abundant. Now, these resources, in the case of education, could be content, assessment, lesson plans. In some other area, it could be something else. So the abstraction is that one way to think about this is using the power of modern digital infrastructure. Can you take scarce resources and make them abundant? And in our thinking, we call this as the context invariant part of our platform model. That means this is something which applies to all people in that vertical. And the art or the trick is, how do you keep digging deeper and deeper into a subject till you can extract the essence of what is that shared digital infrastructure. And that can you get only through doing it and through experience. So that's the layer and that uses the technology stuff. And then we said that in the real world, one solution does not fit all. And part of the challenge we have, especially in complex areas like education, is you have a solution and then you go around the world saying, use this solution. But every context is different, right? The teaching of mathematics in the state of Maharashtra may be very different from in teaching migrant children, Syrian refugee children in Jordan. So everything is different. So is there a way to leverage this digital infrastructure and give it the ability to customize in each context? And that's what we call as the innovation co-creation environment, which allows different groups who are trying to solve different problems to use the power of that digital infrastructure to customize it for different situations. And this we think is very important if you want to really deal with the real diversity of the world for solving social problems. And then let's say that you create these diverse solutions that are contextualized. So you create a Hindi language program that can be used in Bihar, or you create a maths program that can be used in Karnataka. So these are all. Then how do you take it to the user? A user could be a teacher, the user could be a child. And that is done through various delivery networks. And that's what we call as amplification. And I think important to realize that when we talk about amplification, we are actually agnostic of what is that amplification method. So in education, that amplification can be done by private schools, by government schools, by teachers, by parents. So amplification, you have to think of it as different ways. Finally, it's about reaching everyone. So we are not in a ideological issue of government schools are better than private schools or whatever. We're just saying there are all these things on the ground. They're all doing things in different ways. But if they all come onto the same digital platform, they can deliver the service much better, leveraging the scarce resources that we have. And we learned this in the Aadhaar experience because we developed a system to enroll and give identity to 1 billion people. To do that, we did the math and we had to build a system that had to do 1.5 million enrollments per day. So that's the system we built. And these enrollments were happening from some rural Chhattisgarh Naxalite region to the elite of South Bombay. So, but the way we did that was we built a technology which was used everywhere. So even though the context was different, people use the same enrollment software. So we said that digitally, with this content made diverse, you can actually, different people in the ecosystem can use the same stuff to reach kids. So in a particular state, the government schools can use this platform, the private schools can use, the teachers can use, ultimately parents can use, but they're all on one platform. So the harmonization happens through the platform. And that's what we mean by the amplification networks. And we think that if you sort of get this right in a particular vertical area, then you can do something to change the equilibrium of that issue. And we also said, what is the big deal? What is the societal platform? And so we said, let's contrast that with platforms that we understand. We understand market platforms. I mean, today the world has a lot of very, very successful, very capable market platforms. But we said that societal platforms is using platform thinking for solving societal problems. It's not for market. It's not to extract and aggregate value. It is to give value to the players. So empower players and make scarce resources abundant so that everybody has access. And very importantly, use data to empower and not to hoard. So the fact that this platform, while there's a huge amount of data which is created, that data is given away to the respective users so that they can use it to improve whatever they're doing. So this is thinking platforms, but thinking platforms for a social purpose, which is why we coined the term, which actually my wife Rohini coined, saying societal platforms. So now I've given you sort of the theory of societal platforms. I'll instantiate that with EkStep, which is the education thing we're doing. So the mission, as I said, when we walked out of edX we talked about these 200 million kids. And we also not only like to have these large numbers, we like to put stiff time targets. Because, Paul Romer once said, mailed to me saying that the most important human invention is the deadline. So we take that seriously. And so we said we can't buy the open-ended thing and all that. And nor do we like deadlines where we may not be around. So we said let's fix the deadline. So we said let's see how we can improve literacy and numeracy by increasing access to learning opportunities for 200 million kids by 2020. Right? Audacious, publicly stated. So if we fail, you'll all know we failed. So the idea that it puts pressure on us to perform, because one thing we realized is that in markets, the pressure is automatic. Having run a public company listed on the NASDAQ for many years, every quarter you stand up and talk to analysts who question every little detail. Why is the earnings off by 1 cent or whatever? So you realize that because you're in the market and because market has ways to measure progress, profits, earnings per share, cash flow, whatever, you become highly accountable. But in the social sector, because it's a little vague, it's also difficult to enforce accountability because everybody is, so you can spend a lot of time doing not achieving much. So we said the only way we can g- create clarity, urgency, and sense of purpose is by having not only a goal of what we want to accomplish, but by when. So 200 million kids by 2020. So that's a good, everybody's mind gets clear. Okay, let's see how to get this done. Now, the challenge is very large and complex. India has 200 million kids in the age group. We're talking about 1.3 million schools, 23 languages, and very importantly, the challenge of first generation learners. And we tend to underestimate the challenge of first generation because if your parents are educated, then the ambient learning that happens at home is significantly more than if your parents are illiterate. And when half the parents are illiterate, how do you come up with solutions that overcome this challenge of illiteracy at home? And sometimes we tend to ignore this. We think it's automatic, but it's not. And then, of course, the challenge of teachers, vacancies, and all the stuff that all the we know all that. And as the WDR, which came out a couple of weeks back, said, it's a complex thing, right? There's underprepared children, there's motivation of teachers, leadership in schools is not as you would like it, inputs are not there. So these are very, like, lots of issues. Now, historically, we have tried to solve the problem by dealing with one issue. The problem is that in this low level equilibrium, if you solve only one part of it, all the others conspire to bring you down, you know, because they don't like one piece sort of going up. So the tendency is to revert to the mean, revert to the lower level equilibrium. So when you think about solving this, we have to think about how do we solve it as a system as opposed to individual parts. And that's also something we learned when we did the Aadhaar financial inclusion. We solved it as a system and not as individual parts. And the other thing is that we need to solve this very quickly because India is at peak child. And over the next few years, as the fertility rate drops, the number of children will drop, and will an entire generation will pass, and we're still not fixed it. So it's not something that's a 20-year thing. We have to solve it now. So speed is very important. So we need to think in a very different way to solve these problems. And so this is now a specific instance of how we implemented societal platforms at EkStep. And remember, I talked about 3 layers. There's a shared digital infrastructure, there's a co-creation environment, and there's network amplification. Shared infrastructure is all really technology. So it's all about infrastructure for content creation, infrastructure for assessment, infrastructure for creating digital footprints, analytics. It's all open source models, domain models, all that. And what we do is whenever we encounter something which is abstractable into a infrastructure, we move it down there. So the infrastructure becomes richer and richer. And the infrastructure is context invariant. It's not really, you don't care where it's being used. So in theory, this infrastructure layer will work as well in Syria or any other part of the world, and it's multilingual. So everything we have built is multilingual. So we have about 13 languages now, including Urdu and all that. So we can actually build it in many languages across the world. So that is what we call as, I can? The context invariant. And then we have the co-creation layer, which allows different stakeholders to use to contextualize content for themselves. So it has interfaces, it has content editors, it has collections of content you can configure in a different way, and so on and so forth. All this is again built in a very flexible, architected way, and this allows different players to co-create content. So if I'm the state of Maharashtra, I want to create educational content in Marathi for my children. The teachers themselves can use this infrastructure to create content. So they're not depending on some imported content and trying to figure out how to use it. They themselves will create the content. So this is the co-creation. And then different actors, whether it's state governments, schools, private schools, they will amplify this through the network. That's the philosophy. And currently, this is the map of all this. Using this infrastructure, we are rolling out all kinds of applications for teacher development, tuition teachers, home use, energized textbooks. And because they're all on the same network, you suddenly get the power of scale. So let's say there's a organization, we have one which is not called Guruji, which is a big innovator in lesson plans. Earlier they were trying to get, they were selling the lesson plan, but we worked with them and we got some of the lesson plan technology and we paid them some money and got it on our platform as open source. So suddenly any state government can use the lesson plans. And so otherwise we got assessment from somebody. So we got different pieces of the puzzle. And now because it's on the platform, some NGO in Bihar can use a lesson plan that somebody created somewhere else. So these network effects start happening very quickly, which is why the platform becomes richer and richer in capability very rapidly. So this is just an example of the diversity of the platform usage. In Maharashtra, they use it for what they call as energizing textbooks, creating digital textbooks, but not just converting paper to digital, making them alive, making them come alive. Then in Andhra Pradesh, they are using it for teacher development. Then Akshara is using it for math assessment, and somebody else is using it for English language. Pratham is using it for remediation, catching up. So suddenly the same underlying infrastructure, but contextually changed by different players to solve different problems and amplified by them. So think of, and so if these are all the nodes of the network, so you can see that it's just growing up. But there is, to use Paul's example, we converting all knowledge into code, APIs, and readable scripts. So they're all converted into text, readable scripts. So they're all portable across this. So the entire thing is portable through a scripting language. So we have a scripting language to define content. It's all abstracted and codified. So you can actually get complete, you can just go anywhere and do these things. So this is what we call as the education network. And our view is that if we can get this going, then we're taking the whole network and raising the thing as opposed to solving individual problems. And we are working with the Indian government. They are using this technology now as part of their Diksha, which is the national teacher platform. Several states have adopting it. So, the whole thing is now, and everybody is realizing that the power is all of us working together on the platform. And that's how we're getting the network effects going. So I think now what we're doing is, okay, we learned about societal platforms. We're saying, is there a way to build a systematic method for this? Can we take it beyond education? Is there a way to think about solving large societal problems? So we have come out with a whole approach to how to do this. How do you design it for co-creation? How do you design it for minimalistic design? How do you design it for data empowerment from day one so that people have access to data? And we are working closely now with thought leaders, institutions. We would like to work with all of you and see whether we can think of this as a way of solving problems, because I think we want to solve these large problems, but we don't really have a good methodology. And certainly all the software that we are building is all in open source. So it's all on GitHub, open source under a freely available license. So anybody can use the technology and take it forward. We think that's how we'll create lots of public goods around this. And we believe that it's a very difficult thing because a lot of things have to come together, right? Now, first of all, probably this is best done by philanthropy because governments may not be able to do it. Markets will take it in a different direction. NGOs may not have access to capital. Only philanthropists can do this because they can afford to lose all the money. And therefore, we believe that philanthropists should be doing this, or at least in different areas. And it's not leadership of one person. It's about creating this whole system where everybody pitches in. And in some sense, it's also being ideology agnostic, because when we get into things like education, everybody says, I have a method and mine is better than yours. So we say, okay, if that's what you think, why don't you put your method on our system and data will tell us whether it works or not. So it's using data to verify that actually a particular ideology or a particular way, sort of pedagogy works. I mean, sure, try it out. Let's see what happens. And we are using the same deep technology skills which are used in platform thinking in the world, but applying them to social platforms, which is why we need access to technologists who are the best at their business, but would rather solve world's problems than just make money. And it's difficult because there is no clear, ownership for this because it's being done outside the system. But you need to sort of guide this in a way that it reaches maturity, at which point it can go out on its own. So anyway, this is all about inspiring, infusing, improving capacity, and so on. So it's a little difficult, and you can't teach this. You have to do this. So that's, we believe, it's about doing and learning. And right now we are talking to and working in different areas to see whether this infrastructure can be applied for lifelong learning, for financial inclusion, for habitats. So we're just saying, is there enough legs in this approach that you can take it to other fields? And we are still in the early stage of understanding this process. So that's what about Aadhaar and beyond. And I'll be happy to stop now and take questions, discussion, whatever you guys want.